Alright there. I've tried a few ways to make this video. I recorded an audio, I scripted something, I put a lot of images together, and in the end I think it's just going to make sense to me just to tell you it as I know it. It's weird, a lot of you all know that I now live in Cambodia, and it's strange when I talk to people how little people know about this place, and specifically one period of time in this place. Let's go back to 1975. The northern Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, the communists, weeks away from marching victoriously onto Saigon, which will signal the end of the American involvement in the Vietnam War. I mean, even that war, we tend to think of it, if you don't know a lot about it, you think of it as the Americans and the Vietnamese having to tear up communists in the US. But that had been going on for fucking decades. You've got the Japanese in there, the English, the French, just endless. You know, there's a definite scramble for territory in Southeast Asia. Anyone who gets hold of that, you know, the Russians were out there. The Russians were helping the Vietnamese out there. You know, a war-torn area. One of the things that surprised me was when a Thai girlfriend of mine explained to me once how the Americans came to her village in Isan, northern Thailand, and got men to volunteer to go and fight in Vietnam. The Americans were getting untrained Thai men to fight in Vietnam. Why? Simply because they knew about life in the jungle. And terrible truth is that she said of 50 odd men that went, 2 came back, one of which was her father. He came back with one eye missing and a smack habit. The village was missing a generation of fathers. Anyway, so we're looking at then about 1975, and like I say, the Viet Cong are going to march victoriously on Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh as they renamed it after their near deified leader Uncle Ho Chi Minh. So let's go over to Cambodia. The Americans assumed that when the Viet Cong signed the ceasefire that agreed on the withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam, that the lesser known, kind of unknown quantity at the time, a few troops that fought in weird border skirmishes on the Cambodian-Vietnam border, known as the Khmer Rouge, they assumed that they'd be part of that ceasefire and it'd all be wrapped up tidily. But the Khmer Rouge, run by a Marxist called Pol Pot, had very different ideas. He'd been planning a utopian Marxist revolution for decades. He studied in France years, I think about 20 years before 1975, and he wasn't planning on giving up. He was planning on seizing this opportunity. Because what you can say, a lot of people will blame America. America involved in like a 6-year carpet bombing campaign of Cambodia. This is why while publicly they were saying they weren't bombing Cambodia. There's a very famous footage of Nixon, I think it is, saying we have not and we will not bomb Cambodia, while they were literally doing it. They dropped more bombs on Cambodia than they dropped on Japan for the whole of the Second World War. And if you know anything about the bombing of Japan in the Second World War, oh, it's shocking. Yeah, Cambodia really took it. So what you've got is you've got the Americans leaving, you've got the Vietnamese severing ties, the Vietnamese communists severing ties with the Khmer Rouge. So they're suddenly just on their own, a ragtag band of sort of jungle soldiers run by this weird Marxist despot. So they needed a new ally. The North Vietnamese, the communists, sorry, the Viet Cong had abandoned them. So in a master stroke of tactics, Pol Pot invited his decades-long enemy and kind of nemesis, Prince Sihanouk, the rightful monarch to the throne. He invited him into the jungle to trick him, basically, to say to him, look, if you side with us, if you let the Khmer Rouge tell everyone, tell the nationals of Cambodia that you're on our side, we will restore you to your rightful place on the throne once we win. Now, Prince Sihanouk was a god to the Cambodian people, and of course he agreed. There was no other chance of him ending up back on the throne. You know, this was great news to him. Out of the blue, he had a load of guerrillas saying that they would fight their way him back to the throne. Kind of an interesting thing, but a slight sidetrack. Excuse excuse me, he never actually met Pol Pot. Pol Pot was a very clever man, and he stayed well outside. He was serving food and things, appearing to be like a waiter, while Prince Sihanouk actually dealt with another member of the Khmer Rouge that they pretended was Pol Pot. He never met him. It was deceit from the outset. But now the Khmer Rouge can spread the word to the Cambodian people that they're allied with Prince Sihanouk. And like I say, the man was virtually a god to the Cambodian people, and immediately the numbers started growing. The Khmer Rouge were able to put out propaganda films of like women, female armies, child armies. There's footage of 6 or 7-year-old kids driving tanks and things. Classic Marxism, classic equality. Oh, we're all in this together. And the same with the Viet Cong in Vietnam. The women did fight, the children did fight. They threw numbers at that war. They threw lines and lines and columns, and the Americans could shoot them and napalm them and bomb them and stab them, and then another line come and another. You can't win against those kind of numbers. And they were forming again in Cambodia. The rest of the world kind of let this go on. They weren't interested. You know, what was going on now in Cambodia after the Americans had left Vietnam, you know, no one wanted to shine a light on that. You know, it would only bring attention to a hell of a lot of deceit in that area from the Americans. It would only draw attention to, you know, another series of American military failings. So they kind of just left it alone. It must have been like Christmas to Pol Pot. You know, he was left alone. Prince Sihanouk had sided with them, and you can't blame the Americans. A lot of people say that America is it's the Americans' fault, the brutality and the murder that went on with the Khmer Rouge. They made it happen. And as much as I think it's crazy to say they made it happen, but without doubt, they certainly created the necessary social and political relations to let it, that the Khmer Rouge needed to grow, to grow in numbers. So they did. And then when they had millions and millions of people supporting them, they started a war march towards the capital, Phnom Penh. And they were off. And propaganda videos were released of this long march to Phnom Penh. On the way they were taking other provinces. What was it? Champang Krang and Champong Krom, I think. These huge provinces that just fell because they turned up. They were allied with Sihanouk. They looked good. There was hope in the air. And I think it was in April of 1975 they arrived victorious in Phnom Penh. Initially it was kind of weird. There was like an eerie sense of celebration. Monks climbed on tanks. People put flowers down the barrels of guns and things. You know, people waved Cambodian flags. There was a national army. There was a socialist army. It was a national socialist army. You know, it was made up of the working people of Cambodia. In all appearances, allied with Prince Sihanouk for the Cambodian people. They were climbing on tanks. They were celebrating that, you know, years of American war and carpet bombing was over. It was all good and all hope. That was all around sunrise. About 6 o'clock in the morning they arrived, and all that kind of strange celebration occurred. By midday, the same day, the Khmer Rouge started imposing the policies of their leader Pol Pot. Every single person in Phnom Penh was ordered to join a mass exodus and move to the country. The cities were to be abandoned. Pol Pot considered the cities to be a stain of capitalism, the scourge of technology. And everyone had to go. Where it didn't matter if you were sick, if you were frail, if you were hospitalised, if you were pregnant, you know, if you were dying, young or old. Everyone had to go, and if you didn't, you got shot, like many did, on the spot. It went from this crazy celebration to watching family members have bullets put in their head and their bodies flop to the floor to join the rest of them and have their have their blood dry in the sun. And so the exodus began. Millions of people moved to the country. When they got there, collectivization began. Complete collectivization. Collectivization of accommodation, of schools, even the family unit was disbanded. Any children were looked after by communities, by the collective. You know, and the collective is imposed at the cost, at the sacrifice of the individual. There was no space for individualism in Pol Pot's utopia. These people, you know, Pol Pot had been really, as obviously inspired by Marx, but exceptionally inspired by the hill tribes who lived around him in the north, self-sufficient agricultural communities. They needed nothing from the outside world. They provided everything they needed for their simple, basic lives. But there was only like 20 of them. He was trying to make that happen for millions of people who hadn't grown up farming, millions of people who had more other needs than agriculture, and it immediately started failing. In that April in Cambodia is fucking hot, and in that heat, the back-breaking work of digging irrigation, digging farms, ploughing seeds, building houses, building schools, building hospitals, all that shit was back-breaking work, and it was already days into this utopia killing people. It was killing people. People started refusing to work. They were shot. People started questioning the motives. They were tortured. Pol Pot thought that the adults were stained by capitalism. They'd grown up in a capitalist world. They'd used telephones. They'd listened to radios. They'd watched television. They'd been filthed up from the West. And he didn't like them. He didn't trust them. And he put power, real power, in the hands of children. Children governed groups of adults. Children tortured adults. Children killed adults. Intellectuals were all killed. Teachers, doctors, nurses, surgeons, writers, artists, historians, anyone who could think. Rumour has it, if you had glasses, you got shot. He didn't want any intellectuals. They were a threat to his utopia. Nice utopia. And so children were given the task of selecting people. Who was treacherous? Who was spying? Who out of these people here who are digging holes in fields? Who of them don't you trust? And 4- and 5-year-old kids getting that one, and poof, over. Dark, dark times. You know, some people started escaping, and like little escapees were forming up on roads, and they were wandering off looking for food, looking for water, looking for word to see if anyone they know had survived. And of course, there was nothing. The cities were empty. Phnom Penh was a ghost town overnight. When the Khmer Rouge sent them all home, it was empty. When these handful of different escapees got there, nothing there. In a weird symbolic move, the Khmer Rouge had turned the library, the National Library in Phnom Penh, into a pig farm. It wasn't going well. The Vietnamese started to attack the Khmer Rouge quite quickly into the whole nasty nightmare. Not because they were too bothered about looking after the Cambodian people, but they didn't want a strong army on their western border, so they got busy. And very soon, the whole thing just started collapsing. People were dying to ill health, otherwise easily treatable diseases, you know, exposure, lack of food, starvation. Millions died. The average estimates suggest around 2 million people died at the hands of the Khmer Rouge. And then the Vietnamese bombing and shelling and fighting killed another 500,000. A friend of mine, his mum, lived all the way through that period, and she said she entered the reign of Pol Pot with 13 siblings, and within 2 years she was the only one left. And that's not an odd story. There's a genocide museum here in Phnom Penh, and you can go in there. You come out of there a different person. And if you don't, there's something very wrong with you. You know, one of the other things Pol Pot done, and this is a real sign of the megalomania of these crazy Marxists, he set the calendar back to zero, year zero. It wasn't 1975, 1976, it was zero. He started it again. You know, what an ugly thing to do, what an ugly sense of self-importance and narcissism, like all Marxists, and certainly Marxist leaders. You know, Pol Pot socially engineered a country to near death, killing 20% of the population. And think about it, all the clever people. Think about what that does for the nation's gene pool. All the writers, artists, historians, doctors, all the intelligent people were killed. The next generation are all kids of idiots. Well done. Well done. You socially engineered stupidity. You socially engineered the death of a nation. He disappeared into the hills, Pol Pot, carried on fighting for a while. And people slowly got their lives back together. Cambodia slowly got back together. A few more years of starvation, a few more years of piles of bodies everywhere you looked. You know, it's wonderful to be here now. I look out my window in my Phnom Penh apartment, and I can see people, and I can see business, I can see the free market. And they've had no market here. And it's amazing to see people seize the free market and make futures for themselves. There's hope in the air. This is a country that's been ravaged. You know, that little Khmer Rouge thing didn't last much more than a couple of years, but the effects, the negative effects of it are going on to today. Anyone here who's over 40 was part of that, and there's a simple fact: they were either Khmer Rouge, killing people, dozens of people, sometimes hundreds of people, or they were victims and they lost all those people and they were tortured. And when you're buying mangoes off the man in the market and he's got 2 fingers left on that hand and 1 finger left on that hand, or the security guard at the corner who's got a sky that goes from his eye down there and there's no stitches on it, and you start thinking about forgiveness and you start thinking about forgetting, and you realise you've got no part to play in either of them. They're things for individuals. You know, without doubt, one of the worst man-made humanitarian crises. Another Marxist utopia. And I'd like to say another Marxist utopia that ended in authoritarian dictatorship, starvation and murder. But no, it started with that. He cut out the ideological middleman. So do yourself a favour and do the people of Cambodia a favour. Have a look into this. Google the Khmer Rouge, Google Pol Pot. And if you get to visit this beautiful country, talk to the people about it. They're desperate to tell these stories. Go to the Genocide Museum. Thank you.